In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode of the Fact series in which we discuss international political matters every week. This is Foad Mahdavi, and in this episode, I have the honor of being the host of Rober Fantina, an American activist and journalist working for peace and social justice. We are here to discuss the coronavirus as a biological weapon. Thank you for joining us, Robert, and good to be with you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much. For the first step, I'd like to have your rich words about the general concept of bioterrorism. Go ahead.
Well, bioterrorism has been banned by the United Nations, certainly, and most nations have signed on to that ban. However, that does not mean that it isn't being studied and occasionally used. The United States, for example, recently suspended uh, activity at one of their main biological labs. Now, the United States claims that this lab is only for defensive purposes, so that it knows how to respond to some other nation's biological attack. However, we have to remember that the United States always says that its aggressive postures are for defensive purposes. So why this lab still exists, as I said, actions are suspended there right now only because there was some fear that some of the waste from it may be getting outside of the lab and possibly exposing people. But why does it still exist? Is it really for defensive purposes, or does the United States lie about its motivations in studying biological warfare as it lies about so many of its other actions?
Mhm. Uh, Far away from coronavirus, how do you assess Americans' role in the development and the spread of biological weapons? Does the United States violate the Biological Weapon Convention?
I believe that the United States probably does by continuing to at least study and possibly even develop biological weapons to use at some future point. We have to remember there's only one country on the planet that ever used nuclear weapons. That's the United States. There's only one country that has uh, nearly 1,000 military bases around the world, and that's the United States. Now, the United States government spokespeople say this is all for defense, but what are they defending when they have bases so close to Iran? What are they defending when they have bases just throughout the world? They're certainly not defending U.S. borders. They are only defending the U.S.'s geopolitical goals for power throughout the world. So while the United States has signed on to the United Nations ban on chemical weapons development and use, we still certainly don't know what it is the United States is doing in that context.
Now let's jump to the subject of coronavirus. Do you think that actually due to the complex structure of the virus, do you think that it has been manipulated by human? Do you believe that it is classified in the biological weapon category?
From what we know now, it was not. It has not been manipulated. It doesn't appear that there's been any alteration to the genes of the coronavirus. However, that doesn't mean that it can't be used in the future. With the coronavirus and the ensuing pandemic, the world has seen how powerful biological warfare can be. This virus has shut down the economy of basically the entire world. There is a tremendous amount of suffering because of not only because of the illness itself, but because of unemployment. There's a threat of starvation because supply chains are disrupted and food may not be able to get to the people who need it most and who are unable to produce their own food. So while coronavirus appears at this point to have been developed within some animal, possibly a bat, but we don't know, it is certainly something that is now being widely studied and could be used in the future by a country that does not have any moral qualms about using biological warfare. And unfortunately, there are too many countries in the world today who would not worry about that, who would not hesitate to violate not only UN agreements that they have signed on to, but common human decency, and would potentially use biological warfare.
So you completely deny the actually this hypothesis that coronavirus designed to hit America's rival in the economy, China?
Uh, there isn't enough information at this point to make that determination. It's certainly a possibility, but it isn't confirmed as yet. People are certainly studying it to find out what its source was and where exactly it came from, but that is not known at this point, and so I wouldn't want to speculate. Certainly, that possibility, and this is some speculation, exists, but it isn't known at this point.
As there are some evidences that makers of some virus have been researching the Iranian gene for many years and have designed the virus based on it. How do you think about the operation against Iran through spreading the virus? Actually, you don't believe that this is the manipulated virus, that it is made by human. But what do you think about the making biological weapon against Iran?
There are a couple of things I want to comment on here. One is that regardless of the source of coronavirus, the United States has worsened the situation for the Iranian people by not lifting its sanctions. First of all, the sanctions are completely unjust and immoral, violation of international law, should never have happened, and should be released, should be lifted immediately, just in general purposes. But the fact that Iran, like every other country in the world, is suffering from coronavirus and is unable to get many of the needed supplies because of these sanctions just shows that the United States is using this virus, regardless of its source, whether its source was intentional or accidental. It is using this virus to hurt the Iranian people in its effort, its ongoing effort, to topple the legitimate Iranian government. So we have to look at U.S. motivations in taking advantage of a situation, whether they've created it or whether it has happened in some other way. They're taking advantage of this situation to further hurt the Iranian people, which, as I mentioned before, is completely unjust. Iran has never done anything to threaten U.S. security. Iran has not invaded another nation since 1798. The U.S. certainly cannot make that claim. It has invaded at least 30 nations just since the end of World War II. It is responsible for the deaths of at least 20 million people since that time, not including World War II, just since World War II. So it is certainly using this coronavirus pandemic to further damage or attempt to damage the government of Iran by hurting its people.
But many documents, many of which belong to the United Nations, proving that years ago an international plan to reduce the world's population was formulated by some Western powers, and particularly the Zionist regime. Do you consider this current crisis as the continuation of this path or not?
That's certainly very possible. The world population has increased greatly over the years. There are many wealthy countries that have significant impoverished populations, including the United States. The United States also is a racist government. The people of color in the United States suffer more from illness, from poverty, from incarceration than white European descendants. So this is certainly part of that. Also, the Zionist regime has for decades been committing ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. So, and has in this current crisis has stolen tents and personal protective equipment from from Palestine, from Gaza and the West Bank, and other areas for their own use, depriving the Palestinian people of much needed medical equipment. Now, fortunately, as of this time, coronavirus has not hit the Gaza Strip very hard. However, if it does, there are several cases there. If it does, it'll be a catastrophe. And as you said, as far as reducing the population, there is so little in the way of medical facilities there due to the blockade and the illegal blockade and the illegal occupation. So any kind of epidemic that occurs within Gaza will be a catastrophe. They don't have sufficient drinkable water because of Israel. They don't have uh, access to imports because of the apartheid Zionist regime. So the fact that the population could potentially decrease greatly by coronavirus is a possibility, and we'll just see how it progresses. In the United States, where nearly a million people have been afflicted with coronavirus at this point, over 50,000 have died. The U.S. is government is encouraging the reopening of the economy, uh, the end of the social distancing that has been in place for several weeks now, and that is used as a method to prevent the spread. And now the government is encouraging an end to that. They're encouraging businesses to open. They're encouraging things like movie theaters and restaurants, places where large numbers of people gather to open, which uh, can only expedite the spread of this disease, for which there is currently no vaccine and no
Mhm.
cure.
And what is your prediction about this crisis? How many days or months we are involved with this crisis, actually?
This is going to be ongoing for several months. Experts have said that while there may be a slight decrease in the spread of it during the next few months, it will probably return again in the autumn of the year, uh, as strong as it is now. We are not close. There is no research facility that is close to a vaccine at this point. The cures for it for people who have it very severely are are not yet proven. They're still experimental. Some people are able to get it and overcome it, which is very good. But those people who are most vulnerable, the elderly, people who have compromised systems, they may have some lung issues, that sort of thing. There is little that can be done for them at this point. So the death toll that we're going to see is it, we're not close to the end of it yet. It is going to be ongoing. Uh, we'll see a slight decrease, followed by probably a huge jump, which will again have wide-ranging impacts to the world economy. And as I mentioned before, the possibility of starvation of people who rely on imports to get food may not be able to get it because the food isn't being prepared, isn't crops aren't being picked because people are unable to do it due to the illness. And the most vulnerable populations, as is always the case, are those that are at highest risk of getting this disease and of dying from it.
And what do you think about how should crisis management and the policies of opposing bioterrorism be implemented?
Policies should be geared toward uh, preventing the spread of coronavirus, but also assisting those people who are most hurt by the social distancing. People who are no longer able to work and can't pay their rent or mortgage or having trouble buying food, they need to get assistance in so doing. They need to be able to rely on their governments to help them through this difficult time. Again, the most vulnerable people are those that are at risk of suffering the most, not only from the disease itself, but from the lack of income, which will potentially cause them homelessness, hunger, uh, prevent them from being able to continue schooling if they're in a school program. So these are the people who must have uh, governments must respond in a way that will help them. Regarding bioterrorism responses, legitimate efforts to find cures for this or any other disease that could possibly have the wide-ranging effects that coronavirus has need to continue. But these need to be regulated so that they are used to combat uh, a disease like this, but not to spread it should a government decide it wants to do so. Now, we should also remember that the United States, up until 1969, was actively experimenting with biological agents, experimenting often on U.S. citizens who were completely unaware that they were being used in this manner. So that sort of thing must never happen again. If it's happening now, it must stop. But legitimate research into uh, various viruses should continue, certainly.
Great. What is your perspective about the alert that some experts actually had predicted before about the pandemic a couple of years ago?
Yes,
Such as, I forgot the name of that person that released some news about the coronavirus and pandemic, but there were some actually alert about this matter a couple of years ago. What do you think about it?
there were many warnings that this or something similar could occur and would have wide-ranging global impacts, and yet many governments simply ignored it. The United States, for one, uh, was warned in the last few years about the possibility of a serious pandemic. And then in the months before coronavirus began spreading so much, was warned again that the country did not have sufficient personal protective devices or personal protective equipment, that a pandemic, if it happened, would cause widespread suffering and death throughout the United States, and yet the United States did nothing to prepare for it. So this is another example where preparation and reasonable caution need to be continued. When experts raise the idea that a pandemic is coming, governments must pay attention. They must stockpile the necessary equipment. They must make people aware that this is a threat. Perhaps it hasn't happened yet, but it may happen, so they need to be prepared for it. Some countries did. Some countries have the equipment they need, but many do not, including the United States, which was left woefully short of equipment due to government negligence. So when when experts, scientific experts, whose field is in this topic, issue warnings, those warnings should be attended to. And in the past, for some countries, they have not been. And that has been to the detriment of the citizens of those nations.
Great. Thank you very much, dear Robert Fantina. If you want to add something more, I'm all ears.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope that uh,
Thank you too.
other nations will assist the countries that are unable to get all that they need right now. For example, Iran, which is struggling, and I hope other nations will assist it. I hope that this ends soon for everybody, and that the countries that have the most influence in these sorts of things, that can do the most good and the most harm, will choose to do the most good. Thank you.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.
It was another talk with Robert Fantina on coronavirus as a biological weapon. Thanks for watching and goodbye.